On episode 322 of the Tennis Files podcast, you'll learn how to prevent injuries and strengthen your body with Kayla Fujimoto Epperson. Hey there, and welcome to another episode of the podcast. Really appreciate you listening in. And today we have a very insightful interview with Kayla Fujimoto Epperson. Kayla is a physical therapist. She also has her doctor of physical therapy, and she is a certified strength and conditioning specialist. I first caught wind of her actually on Instagram because she has a lot of great content on there. And she is the owner of the Athlete Connection since June of 2020. She is also a former Division I tennis player at Indiana University. And one thing that's really cool with Kayla is that she trains Jennifer Brady, who just recently got to the semifinals of the doubles at the US Open, as well as a third round of singles there. And Jennifer Brady, I believe, was like top 15 in singles and top 50 in doubles at one point. And she underwent some injuries, and Kayla worked and is still working with her really hard to get her in tip-top shape. And the comeback has been great, as you know, I just mentioned Jennifer's results. So really great stuff there. Kayla also completed a Kovacs Institute Tennis Serve Biomechanics Fellowship with, one of my favorites, Dr. Mark Kovacs. So she has a lot of great background and insight, obviously, on the topic at hand today, which is just how to help you with your longevity in the sport, how to feel better on the court and perform better on the court. So I'm really excited for this interview, for you to listen to it. So without further ado, here is my interview with Kayla Fujimoto Epperson. Hey everybody, welcome to this special episode of the podcast. Really a pleasure to have on Kayla Fujimoto Epperson on the show. Definitely really excited to get this one started because obviously you have a lot of great experience, Kayla, regarding injuries and just physical therapy in general, for specifically for tennis players. So welcome to the show, and how are you doing?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm doing great. I just came back from the US Open and had an awesome experience there, and enjoying some time at home right now for a little bit.
Cool. Awesome. Well, my first question for you, I think this is super cool and not really tennis related at all, but I read that you're a puppy raiser for Leader Dogs for the Blind. So I was wondering how you got into that and how that's been. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's like a little fun fact. So my family became involved with Leader Dogs for the Blind, which is a nonprofit organization in Michigan, when I was in grade school. And so what we would do is we would get a puppy and then keep the puppy for a year and just raise them and socialize them and prepare them for becoming a seeing eye dog. And so we did that throughout my whole childhood growing up. And then my husband and I did it when we were first married. And our first dog that we raised, they actually pulled her for breed stock. So they wanted to breed her. So we had 3 litters of puppies with her, and they all went through the Seeing Eye Dog program. So it's been a really cool experience to see them working and things later on.
Wow, that's really cool. I love dogs. So just when I saw that, I was like, oh, this is amazing. But yeah, I always am really interested in seeing how people get into tennis. And so I see you're also a great player as well, and you played D1 and whatnot. But how did you get your start in tennis? Your early days, how'd that work?
Yeah, I think I started playing when I was probably around 3 years old. My parents just introduced me to the sport. I played a ton of sports growing up as a kid, but tennis is just what stuck with me. I played other, team sports and soccer, was in swimming, gymnastics, kind of tried it all. But by the time I was 10 years old, I went all in on tennis and really enjoyed it, and was fortunate enough to be able to play, junior competitive tennis and high school, and then play in college. And I had an amazing experience when I played at Indiana, and I still like to get around and play every now and then now too. So it's been a cool journey with it, and meeting so many people through the sport too.
Awesome. And we'll talk about, Jen, obviously later on, Jen Brady, but do you hit with her sometimes, or?
So when I first started working with her, we hit a couple times, and then, she was like, oh, you can maybe warm me up for a match. But then She hits a really heavy ball, and once I start shanking a couple, then she's like, all right, time for you to get off the court. So I don't
Ruthless.
play with her too often, but I do
Uh-huh.
feed her balls quite a bit, or I had when I started working with her. I'm good at feeding.
Nice, nice. Yeah, me too. No, that's really cool. You've got to hit with her, and yeah, it's totally understandable. Like they're definitely different level from us, but super cool. And I was curious, given your obviously your background and your expertise, like what was the fitness like in college for you? Because I remember when I played college tennis and at UMBC, it was D1 as well, but like a mid-major. I mean, we had, like pretty consistent fitness sessions, but I feel like fitness has obviously evolved a lot, and there's certain things that we did that I look back upon and now and think like, oh, maybe we should have done that, or maybe we should have done more. So, how is it like for you while in college? Then how has it maybe changed?
Yeah, I mean, I think the weight room and fitness and strength and conditioning has always been a passion of mine. Like after I finished college, I got my CSCS so that I could train and do strength and conditioning while I was in physical therapy school. And my freshman year at Indiana, we actually were just doing like on court tennis specific type fitness. We weren't in the weight room or anything. And there were quite a lot of injuries my freshman year. And it's something that I actually went to my coach myself and was like, we have this amazing weight room facility. All the other teams train there. Like at the time, I used gym for the athletes was the largest in the country. And I was like, we have this beautiful facility and we're not using it. And I
Mm.
can just see the value of like us working on strength training. And so then from my sophomore year on, we started working with a strength and conditioning coach there as a team. And I just think it's so valuable for injury prevention to work on the strength side, to do, the conditioning to supplement, the on-court training and skill development that we do in the sport. So it's really important to me. And it's also a huge part of now the way I practice as a physical therapist, and definitely more exercise based than a lot of the manual skills that maybe traditionally were involved in physical therapy. And I think there's a huge value to it. And so I really rely heavily on the strength and conditioning coach that works together with Jen and me. And we have a really good team and collaborative effort there.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Such a go-getter too. I love that. As a freshman, just like, hey, what's going on here? We got some
Yeah.
stuff we can use. So I love it.
All up some weights. Let's go.
That's right. That's right. But yeah, you mentioned exercise base as a big part of your practice, and I remember after I think strained my calf, whatever I did to it, but I went to a PT up north a bit, and then he had me doing a ton of different exercises in addition to like some manual stuff that he did. But I found that just like you really need to build the strength back up and things like that to get fully healed and back to strength. So I'm glad that he's following, the what your philosophy as well. It's important. And then like I guess you mentioned your injuries in college, which is obviously rough. I think I had like a wrist tendonitis or something like that. That was annoying and had to do a lot of stim on it, I guess. But what were a couple of the like most impactful injuries? I'm curious to start, and then I have some follow-ups after that.
Yeah, definitely. So actually, it was when I was 12 years old. I had a knee injury. I was out from tennis for about a year. And in that whole experience and different various doctors' visits and things like that, trying to figure out what was going on, I had one doctor tell me that I would never play tennis again. My competitive days were over. And
Whoa.
that was like a really pivotal, like impactful point in my life. And, at that point, obviously I went and saw other doctors for other opinions, but that was really crushing for me as a 12-year-old to be told I couldn't play tennis again. Like that was my sport. I was all in on it. Thankfully, I was able to find a doctor that helped me out. I started physical therapy at that point. And at 12 years old, I decided I wanted to be a sports PT. And I never changed my mind after that. So going to college then, I'm playing first couple years, and then I started developing some overuse injuries. I started having shoulder pain my sophomore year, and the whole conference season, I was kind of serving underhand, like couldn't really make it through matches at that point. Tons of different, doctor's visits at that point. And then that fall, actually underwent shoulder surgery. So then I knew I was going to miss pretty much the whole fall season. And then I was training left-handed just so I could have reps and be on the court. I'd actually had some kind of overused left wrist pain the same season, sophomore year, and then it got worse. And as I was trying to come back after my shoulder injury, this wrist pain was worsening, and they found I had a tear in there, and so recommended surgery. So I ended up having 2 surgeries my junior season, and just
Wow.
completely took the year as a wash. So that was a really hard year for me, like identity wise, like being away from the sport. I did some volunteer coaching with the teams that helped out a lot, but that whole experience being out just really reaffirmed that I wanted to be a sports physical therapist and help other people maybe not have to go through the same experience I did, bouncing around doctor's visits, or really getting good sports rehab to prevent some surgeries or things that maybe I wish I didn't have at that point.
Yeah. Thanks for taking us through that. I'm sure it's some painful memories, but it became much stronger for it. And then, it's like helpful with your career, obviously, so that you're doing so well. And I guess with that, I mean, you being 12, this question probably doesn't apply, but what are some things that you think you could have, maybe you would tell your past self, like that, to have done, like, before the injury, so that you would have like maybe had a less chance of getting them?
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of comes with the territory, like a little bit, like stuff is going to pop up. It's so uncertain, like when things happen, but being really prepared and having a good team around you is helpful. Maybe some of the things that I would look back now is like working with someone that really understands tennis and some of the biomechanics involved in different stroke mechanics. A lot of the injuries that tennis players sustain are overuse in nature and develop over time. And so sometimes instead of just looking at like the specific, body tissue or injury itself and looking at how has this developed from a mechanics standpoint would be helpful. Like tweaking some mechanics on my serve could have maybe avoided, some of the repetitive, strain or pain I was experiencing. And then the same thing with my two-handed backhand, the way that my preparation phase, my backhand, the way that I kind of dropped my wrist excessively was a lot. And maybe limiting some of that and making some of those changes with my coaches before, undergoing some of these surgeries. And then also just like more robust rehab and strengthening. I think that would have been helpful for me, and looking at my whole body instead of just like, okay, strengthen the shoulder. It's like, what else could I be doing to like work on my core, my leg strength, where my power is coming from, and my serve to help out with not just the arm itself. And so a lot of the work I've done since going through those experiences myself and being in PT school, like, working with some doctors that are specialized in tennis medicine and putting out some of these resources for coaches to be like, hey, like, here's some stroke mechanic things to look out for when players start having pain, and where you can kind of cue them or make tweaks in their biomechanics that won't necessarily impact their performance. I think that's really key.
Yeah, that's super insightful there. I know that you completed a Kovacs Institute Tennis Serve Biomechanics Fellowship. So Dr. Kovacs is awesome, obviously 8-stage model of the serve. And yeah, it makes a big difference, obviously the stroke mechanics, like it on the serve, you can't produce like a lot of power like with just your arm, but then you're going to feel terrible and get injured.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's kind of like the efficiency of the motion too. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I guess as a follow-up for the fellowship that you did, like what's maybe like one thing that you learned there that was eye-opening that you think like amateur players would benefit from?
Yeah, I mean, Dr. Kovacs, he's a wealth of knowledge, like super grateful to have him in my corner. He's actually the one who introduced me to Jen.
He's the man.
Yeah, so he's a great mentor and a colleague for me. But yeah, that experience was really interesting for me. I helped when I was early in my career as a physical therapist, just looking through some serve mechanics research. And for me, I think there's a misconception and like kind of the adult recreational player of like, a lot of it comes from good arm strength, your serve. And like you said, it's more specifically the loading phase of your serve where you can make a lot of positive changes in your performance, developing more power, being more efficient, and then maybe also reducing risk of some of those, upper extremity injuries we see a lot in the shoulder, the elbow, and the wrist in a tennis player at the recreation level.
Yeah, definitely a lot of important stuff. Like with me right now, I'm trying to load my back leg more. That definitely helps a lot with power and reducing like arm pain.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and so let's see here. In terms of like the amateur players specifically, I know you work with the big pros now, Kayla, but I was wondering for amateur players, like what's the most typical injuries that like they usually get?
So I would say in the adult recreational player,
Yeah.
35 plus, we're going to see a lot of tendon related injuries. And so those things happen mostly when there's a mismatch in the strength of those tendons and then the load forced upon them. So when there's big spikes in like your training or like practice volume or match play, let's say maybe for 2 to 4 weeks you've played maybe once a week, and then you go and play a weekend tournament, you've got like 3 to 5 matches, like that's when injuries are going to occur because your body hasn't adapted to that amount of load, and when you ask it to in a short period of time, things start to break down. So Achilles tendonitis or like tendinopathy, patellar tendinopathy or knee pain, that sort of thing. We see like rotator cuff strains or shoulder involvement in those athletes. And actually I have a resource for you if you want to share, but I do a lot of work with Dr. Jayanthi, and he's with the Emory Tennis Medicine Program, and he just put out adult tennis warm up with some of the most common injuries we see in our adult rec players. It's a great resource, and I can share.
Yeah, I'd love to do to share that. Thank you so much. And Dr. Jayanthi is awesome as well. Obviously, I had him on my summit a couple of times, and yeah, he's great. So love to get that link from you later on and share it with the peeps. So that would be great. And I guess this may like seem like a dumb question, but I think it'll help the audience. Full of dumb questions usually, but what is a tendon, and then like how can you actually strengthen that? Because I think when most people like go to the gym, they think like, oh, I'm gonna go and like strengthen my muscles,
Yeah,
muscles
no, that's
usually,
a great question.
Yeah,
Thanks for asking that.
Sure.
So the tendon is the portion of the muscle that attaches it to the bone. So you've got muscle tissue, and then it forms into a tendinous type structure, a little bit more ropey, and that's what attaches that muscle to the bone. And so those are the areas that can be more susceptible to injury or stress, especially like, if you're not training, like running or jumping or quick change of direction type power motions, then when you go on court and you ask your body to quickly run up to a short ball or jump up for an overhead and land, like those are the demand on those tendons is usually what becomes injured or can develop over time, become painful because you're not training those loads off outside of just playing tennis alone. So working plyometric training into your gym routine and like really heavy, like strengthening exercises like calf raises. I'd say, for example, for Achilles tendinopathy. So jumping, changing direction, your Achilles is what attaches at the bottom of your calf muscle to your heel. And so doing heavy loaded and slow calf raises could be really helpful for you, because then when you go and want to push off quick on the tennis court, that's the kind of force that's going to be applied to that area.
Fantastic. No, this is awesome. And then in terms of like the plyometric training, like, is that just like can you describe that? Is like the fast movement stuff, or?
Yeah, quicker movements where more powerful explosive motion. So jumping, just regular like squat jumps, or practicing landing from like a box jump, or, stepping down off a box and working on decelerating and landing mechanics. So I think after a certain age, a lot of people just stop jumping, right? As kids, you run and jump and you're moving a lot. And then as adults, like we lift weights in the gym, but it's like we don't really train athletically in the gym. Like you typically don't see someone like doing side to side bounding motions, or doing like single leg hopping, skipping motions, or jumping and rotating in the air, just kind of playing with it. And those are the kinds of like loads and demands that are helpful off the court that will transfer to actual tennis movement as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. Appreciate that. And then a selfish question for you, Kayla. So I actually had pulled my, or as I mentioned earlier, like strained my calf. So I guess for that, and kind of, I guess, kind of maybe even just a review of like what you said, like if you pull your calf, like after you recover, obviously, you'd recommend like maybe the heavy strength and like the calf raises with weight? Is that what you would kind of like recommend there?
Yeah, I mean, I can't give specific medical advice, obviously,
Yeah,
but
true.
like, working with, a physical therapist or medical professional to make sure you're cleared and able to return to sport would be important after you have an injury like that. But then progressive loading. So working on body weight loading and calf raises. Are you able to do that? Then can you add resistance to it and be able to tolerate that amount of load? And then are you able to progress then to more powerful movements, explosive or quick motions like jumping or pushing off? And then when you're able to do that in like a linear fashion or straightforward, then can you do it laterally or with quick changes and changing the direction and speed? And so there has to be some sort of linear progression before returning to tennis and asking your body to respond in that way. And sometimes people want to go, once they're cleared, quote unquote, from the doctor and they get that check mark of return to sport, there's actually a pretty important progression that has to occur between, that injury state and then progressing back to the demands of the sport. And injuries will recur if that phase is skipped completely and you just try to jump right back in. And so there are no shortcuts when it comes to rehab, and having a good progression like that, or working with a strength coach that can help train those things, or a physical therapist, is really important.
Yeah, 100% it is. And yeah, like you mentioned with like the tendons where like you just reintroduce them like too quickly, or maybe you're not doing the right things to strengthen them. Like I remember playing a doubles match of, was it maybe like 4 or 5 months ago? And my mind remembered like how quick I was. I love like sprinting around. So then I sprinted for a drop shot, but then like at the last step, like I kind of like pulled something in my groin. And so that was like very painful. But it's just what you're talking about. You really have to focus on your strength of your body and mobility as well and all that stuff. So
I think
I
you
guess,
bring up actually
yeah,
another good point there, if I can jump in. But
yeah,
it's like when you come back from an injury, so many people think of just training the injured area, but like other parts of your body, now that you've been off for a period of time, they're also susceptible because they haven't been used to those loads. So some sort of progression is really important. And, even this came up with working with a lot of athletes in the past that I worked with in my practice. It's training their whole body during that rehab stage and when they're off. So it's like, yes, we're rehabbing the injured area, but we're also incorporating the rest of the body in your training. So that way, when you go back, it's not like you've lost fitness or lost strength in those areas as well.
Yeah. Another great point. Appreciate that, Kayla. And then in terms of like foot pain, again, this is a selfish question. I shouldn't ask all these questions, but like it'll help others. So like I have been experiencing some heel pain recently in my left foot, and actually like got this let me see what this is called, like Heal That Pain or something. Like I don't know if you've heard of that, but it's like an insert. Yeah, it's an insert that like some of my friends have used in their shoe for like their heel to like, I guess, reduce like impact. But I guess in general, like what are your thoughts on like, tennis players developing like heel and foot pain and things like that? Like, any common causes that maybe you've like, seen in your athletes, and like what to do?
Yeah, definitely. So I think there's a lot of variables, right? And everyone's going to be pretty individualized. So seeking help from a specific healthcare provider is the number one thing I'd recommend. But I think some common things are big spikes in training load or volume. Like I mentioned before, like people don't really think about it. They think, oh, I'm a generally healthy person. I can, if I haven't played in like 2 weeks, I'll go play for 3 hours one day. And your body's going to respond probably poorly to that because it's not used to that demand. And so looking at like your tournament schedule or your practice load, if you have only been training 5 hours a week and the next week it's 8 to 10, you're almost doubling your volume. That's when injuries start to occur or things can pop up. So I think that's probably the number one thing I would look at is incremental progressions in your workload or your training or practice volume. The other thing I see is when people start changing their footwear, or introducing a shoe without like a break-in period. Sometimes that can make subtle changes in the mechanics of the way your foot is contacting the ground, or, how you're impacting when you're playing tennis. And so if you're going to have a footwear change, like break them in gradually. And also, don't be changing what brand of shoes you're wearing like every few weeks, because your body's gonna, you're not gonna know like if your foot actually is adapting to it, or if the change is making things worse at that point. And then it's going to be, just specific to your anatomy and physiology and how you move. Like, do you have compensations where maybe you're not able to move your foot in the good way, an appropriate way to push off, or to have, optimal loading through your hip, knee, and ankle. And that's where, working with someone like a sports physical therapist or a strength and conditioning coach that can look at your form and mechanics would be helpful. So that way you can kind of like prevent those injuries from happening, or catch them before you kind of have them pop up from just a mismatch in the way you're loading your foot and ankle.
Yeah, I really appreciate that advice, Kayla. And so I guess, one thing that amateurs struggle with is, I guess most of them like just play tennis. And then like the ones who like start getting serious are like, okay, like I need to, add some workouts in and stuff like that. But then like also, people maybe don't add the right exercises, or they're not stretching enough, or they're not doing like enough prehab. So I was wondering in particular, what's like an easy way to build prevention exercises into our routine, like for amateur players? What would you recommend?
Yeah. So, obviously it'd be great if everyone could get in the gym and, lift weights at like 3 times a week on top of their tennis, but maybe that's not possible for everyone. And so taking exercises and building them into your warm up and cool down routines, and then just making it a habit of showing up early before, you're not just rolling off from work and coming up to the court and just starting to play right away. And, taking 20 to 30 minutes, if you can, before a match or practice to actually go through a dynamic warm-up routine. And then you can mix in some of your calf raises, your lunges, your single leg balance, and like hip stability work. A lot of this is in the tennis 10 plus program that I'll share with you from Emory. But people think like it's silly, and it's, what is 10 to 15 minutes or more before playing tennis going to do for me? But when you can work on those skills over time, it can help you develop more coordination and some strength with those movement patterns. And if you're going to do anything at all, I think that's kind of the low hanging fruit where, if you can dedicate to show up a little bit early and do that work, it'll be really impactful over time. And then cool down. Everyone just wants to walk away, pack up, maybe go to the bar after and hang out, social hour. But 10 minutes of just some dynamic stretching can help you with your recovery, and then also good recovery with hydration too, not just beers after playing.
Yeah.
But I think that's probably where people an adult rec player can make the biggest impact. If you can't get in the weight room, or you don't have a regular strength routine, really dedicating that extra, 15, 20 minutes before you play and incorporating some of the strengthening motions into your warm-up routine, then you don't have to have a whole separate gym routine attached to it.
That's really fantastic. In terms of, you mentioned recovery, so like, the stretching and whatnot, does it make a difference, how soon you do it after exercise? Like, I think I can remember for sure, a few times where, played a match and then just like started talking to the opponents or whoever and just like totally just blanked. And then, the next morning I did it. So like what's the impact there? Is it as effective? Like if you stretch a few hours later the next day, or, should you do it like immediately?
I think it probably depends too on like how intense your practice was or your match that day. But it is better to do it soon after playing, when your body is still warm and you can actually cool down with some active movement by doing it. But, if you're going to get it in the next day, that's better than not at all. But you generally want to do some kind of light active recovery right after, whether it's just walking around. I mean, at the pro level, you see everyone hop on a bike or something right when they get off the court, just to like get their heart rate down, get their body cooled down. But that's when your muscles are still warm at that point after playing, it's probably the best time period to do some of that static stretching than when you're kind of cold and maybe stiffened up a bit later.
Gotcha. And Kayla, you mentioned drinking, and I'm actually drinking right now, water. But
Yes.
yeah, I was trying to trick you there. But I was wondering, in terms of, like obviously there's these USCA league matches, and then people will, have a drink and whatnot. I was wondering like the effects on on your recovery, like from drinking, because like I have an Aura ring that I use, and it's really disheartening because even having like one drink like at night, and then look at my data the next day, and then it shows that my heartbeat was higher, and was it the HRV, like it just like plummets down
Mhm.
down to the ground. So I was wondering your thoughts on having a drink like afterwards, and just like any advice on that.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably a great question for like a sports registered dietitian. They have
Mm.
a lot of resources on it, but in general, yeah, it's going to impact your sleep for sure. Like you said, your heart rate will stay elevated. Your quality of sleep goes down after having an alcoholic drink, and then drinking alcoholic beverages can impact your performance like over the next 72 hours, up to a week, even after, just depending binge drinking night out. But yeah, like it is really impactful on recovery, because once you have like one night of maybe not great sleep and recovery, that can extend into your performance the next day and your body's just ability to recover over the next 2-3 days.
Yeah, that's very good
So
advice.
supplementing with water as best you can, but again, like you're not really reversing the effects at that point.
Oh, darn. Okay. Because I like to double fist with, a beer and Pedialyte. I was wondering if that would work, but sounds like maybe not as good. But actually just kind of random question, building on this question I just had. But do you ever see pros like, after a match or whatever, like they just have like a drink or something?
Personally, no. I mean,
Okay.
we've probably all seen the press conference with like Jess Pagula drinking a beer after, like just so
Yeah.
that she can do her drug testing and get that going. But I think the hardest thing, what I see more commonly, is players when they get pulled for drug testing post match, is they aren't able to go to the bathroom for like hours, which blows my mind, because then that's kind of a clear sign that they're already dehydrated at that point, or not drinking enough like in their match if they don't need to go. So
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Anyway, I was going to say something, but it's TMI. So in terms of your experience with Jennifer Brady, obviously a great player, that you're with full time, which is so cool. We were chatting before this, obviously, and I learned that. But what's been your role with Jennifer first off, and then I have a ton of other questions.
yeah, of course. So I was introduced to Jennifer in like February of this year through Mark Kovacs, and started working with her full time in March. And at that point, she had been out from tennis for a couple years, and so my role was coming in and intensive rehab, physical therapy, working with her every day. And it was long, they were long days. We were putting in a lot of time on the rehab side of things. At that point, she had a coach helping her out at USTA, but sometimes when he was traveling for other tournaments, then my role also became feeding balls and helping run some practice sessions, where just getting her volume up back on court and progressing her volume with time on court, different strokes we were practicing. And then collaborating with the strength and conditioning coach, Richard Langford, who's with the USTA, and helping to kind of build up her fitness, in addition to some of the rehab we were doing. Some modifications had to be made during that time, but basically since March, we probably had 3 to 4 months where it was a very rehab focused, return to tennis type of a focus. And then it was return to competition level and match play, point play, and progressions leading up to that. And obviously there are hiccups along the way, just like any sort of return to sport progression. You kind of expect that. And so then it's a lot of adapting, adjusting, modifying, and then back to making progressions as you can through that process.
Gotcha. And when you say adjustments and modifying, like what were some of those that you all had to make?
Yeah, so we kind of touched on this earlier, like when you're returning back to a high level of sport, other body areas that aren't used to that sort of load or playing tennis, things can pop up. And so when things pop up, or symptoms flare up, then you kind of have to backtrack a little bit and readjust. Like, is it the training volume that's too much, or is it too much time on court or too many repetitions of, do we need to go from a half court to a 3/4 court before going to a full court at that point? Are we just doing, rally balls cross court, or did we introduce live ball and maybe live ball was too much load? And so there's a lot of different factors that go into those return to play progressions and then making adjustments to that. And then also, did we introduce a new movement pattern in the weight room and that's tolerated well, or do we need to modify that, or was doing that in addition to tennis too much? So it's kind of like there are a lot of moving parts, and now saying out loud it sounds very confusing and difficult, but I think we had a really good team and all worked together and were able to help get her back to some competition level by the end of this summer.
Awesome. Yeah, kudos to you and your and the team. Just curious, did you all make any equipment changes to Jennifer's, like her racket or like strings, tension, anything like that?
Tennis specific wise, like with the racket, no, like she's stayed with the same. I think the biggest thing was she had some lower extremity injuries. So looking at footwear was something we were doing quite a bit, and, inserts, no inserts, different brands of tennis shoe. And we were training on clay court, which, training a different court surface can impact movement too. And so those were probably more of the other variables that we were considering through that process.
Gotcha. Super cool. And then in terms of a typical match prep day, and actually I saw a cool like Instagram post that you did. I mean, they're all cool, but this particular one with Jen and like some I guess like training on the morning of, but I guess I'll get to that in a second. But just generally speaking, like what sorts of things does Jen do, and do you have, your players do to prepare for matches?
Yeah. So the day of a match, like tennis scheduling is so crazy to me, because like sometimes the schedule can come out like late at night, 10, 11 p.m. And then you have to plan your next day based on that. And so it's hard to plan, but I'll say in general, most players on a match day, if they're playing in the midday, first on, you can better plan your schedule. But if you're, second, third on, fourth on, and you're waiting around, you kind of have to guess and estimate like what time am I going to go on, and that can be a challenge. But most players will want to do some sort of on-court warm-up or hit about 30 minutes. If players need any sort of like manual therapy or treatment, they're going to do that before they play, along with their dynamic warm-up. And then the warm-up on court, and then you're just kind of playing the waiting game until your match. And so players will typically, if you're waiting on a court to finish, you'll wait till it's like, that person's like in the second set and up, maybe like they have at least 3 games. And then, okay, maybe I've got like 20 minutes or so to warm up before that match starts. And so you'll start your warm up, and then, oh man, it went 3 sets. So now we have to wait a little bit longer and then re-warm up again and do some dynamic movement. So that part can be a little challenging. But on a match day, that's kind of what preparation would look like. And then making sure that the athlete's getting a good solid meal and fuel in about a couple hours before, their projected match time. And then, 30 to 60 minutes before going on, they're getting good hydration and some sort of quick energy or carb type nutrition so that they're ready to go and play.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I know you're not like a dietitian or anything, but I was curious, like for hydration drinks, like are there any particular ones that you see around? I mean, I've talked to, some experts about it, and some recommend like, Scratch or Cytomax or whatever. And then like some say like, oh, Gatorade is totally good. And so I was wondering, like, have you seen any that you might recommend, or just whatever, just seen them?
Yeah. I'll pass this to, there's a couple of really good sports dietitians that I follow. So Jessica, the sports RD on Instagram, she puts out a lot of great hydration resources. And then Riley Beatty is also a sports RD on Instagram, and she has some good resources and specifics there. But if you're doing exercise for just an hour, you can get away with, just your water and for hydration. But if you're doing vigorous exercise for more than that, then that's when you want to incorporate some sort of like carbohydrate in your drink, which is like a sugar, and then electrolytes. So you can see things with like the different electrolyte packets that you can get, Liquid IV. I mean, other brands, people will use Element. Like Element is great for the sodium replenishment, but it doesn't have that carb component. And so making sure if you're doing vigorous exercise more than an hour, you've got those other things in addition to just your water. But yeah, I would say if you're interested in learning more, I would definitely check out those two people. They put out a lot of really good sports specific nutrition resources.
Awesome. Love the shout outs there. And so was Jessica the sports RD, and then what was the other one? Was Riley, what was it?
Riley Beatty.
Oh, BD. Okay. Cool.
Yeah, Beatty.
Oh, I'm glad you spelled that, because I just put B and D like letters.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for that. So yeah, on to the IG post that I was talking about. So I think it was a post about like working out the morning of a match day when you have a late match. I was wondering, how that might benefit players, and then have some other follow-ups there as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that post specifically, she was probably going to go on court around 8 p.m. that night.
8:30, I think.
Yeah. And so what happens is you have like a high level athlete and they wake up around 8, 9 a.m. and then you've got all day, and you're either sitting at the hotel all day long, you're sitting on site all day long, and the body can just feel sluggish. And so it doesn't have to be an intense exercise, but getting her in the gym, 30 to 45 minutes at most, like early on, I like to say about 10 to 12 hours before that match time, just get the body moving, do some mobility work, do some activation motions or some quick power movement just to get like the blood flowing, get a little bit of a sweat in. Can be good for the body. So that way, by the time match time rolls around, you're not feeling sluggish and like I've been sitting for 12 hours today. And it can just be good for them mentally too, to get some movement in the morning and just feel kind of refreshed.
Awesome. And then you mentioned activation exercise. It says plural, sorry. But what is what is an activation exercise?
Yeah, I guess that's kind of a bad term. Any exercise is going to activate muscle groups.
Okay.
So yeah, it's just getting movement in, like, big muscle groups, large movement patterns, total body, and, just feeling good at that point, I guess.
Yeah. Gotcha. Yeah, it's super important. And then in terms of like just working on strength and power in season, like I know that, there's a lot of people who are very wary of like doing really any sort of like work like that, just because they feel like it'll affect their tennis. And obviously, like, if you do some bench press and deadlift, and then you go on the tennis court, that's gonna not feel that great. But like, what are your thoughts and your advice on like how to maybe structure the strength and power workouts, like when you're playing a lot of tennis?
Yeah, I mean, when players are in season on the pro level, like when you're traveling and on the road, it's hard to maintain like a certain strength and conditioning program because your schedule is so different with match travel days. So when you get the opportunity to still work on strength and power, I mean, I think that morning we still worked heavy strength, but the volume was a lot lower. So she's still getting some of that input and training. And like I said, we'll work closely with the strength coach at USTA, and he'll help program for us as well. But it's a big misconception for players that, if I'm playing in season, I can't do my strength training because I'm going to be sore. But honestly, if you're sore, you're just doing the wrong strength training or not programming it in a way that's going to help you. Because when you're in season, the goal is to maintain your strength by continuing to work out and keep your fitness level up. If you stop cold turkey and you're just playing your sport, I don't think that's a great plan for you. Like, you're going to have injuries pop up, you're not going to feel as strong necessarily. And so working in strengthening can still happen in season. It's just a different volume or intensity than like a preseason training session. And like, if you need help with that, like if you're playing at a high competitive level, I would really recommend hiring a strength and conditioning coach that can help program for you and look at, if you are playing, some competitive matches, like when would be a good time to ramp up your training, or when is it a good time to go more in maintenance mode with those things.
Gotcha, Kayla. Yeah, but that's a really good principle that you mentioned, just like, if you're playing a lot of matches, like, lower the volume, but still do something to keep the strength up. And then like when you have a lull, then more intensity and
You can
whatnot,
ramp
volume.
up.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I guess with like the recovery, like routine, what are maybe like the 2 or 3 most important things that amateur players, should be doing? Like, do they need, would you say like cold shower is like one of the vital ones, or I mean, like what are a couple of the ones that are the most important?
Um, so I'd say lowest hanging fruit, make it as easy as possible. You don't need all the fancy recovery devices and things. Like if you have access to it, great. But in general, like, a good cool down routine. So just light active movement, walking around, get your heart rate to recover, maybe some deep breathing exercises to let your heart rate come down, if you're not going to like hop on the bike or something after. And then taking a good 10, 15 minutes, if at the minimum of static stretching, where you're just doing, holding stretches for, 30 seconds at a time, repeating it a couple of times throughout all your major body groups. So that Tennis 10 Plus that we'll share would be probably the most simple routine that you could do, easiest to implement. You don't need a lot of equipment. And then recovering with good hydration and nutrition after, if you're playing long hours, like getting a good meal after, like good carb protein sources, so that way your body and muscles can recover instead of not doing those things. And then you can get kind of in the weeds with ice baths, compression boots, game ready, what have it. But if you're not doing the basics well, then you have no business looking into those types of other, modalities. And then sleep is really key. Getting good quality sleep, at least 8 hours, even as adults. If you think you can run on 6, it's just not true. Your body's not going to recover.
Awesome. Yeah. So light movement, stretching, nutrition and hydration, and sleep are like the pillars.
Yeah. Those are the basics. If you can't do those well, then like you said, you don't have to look into all the flashy tools and things.
Yeah. Ice bath, 1 hour sleep. No food won't work.
It's not going to work out great.
Yeah, I never tried it, but it's my thought, and yours as well. Glad for the backup. And then in terms of like kind of switching gears, I mean, it must have been just so thrilling for you. I mean, Jen did so well, and it's again like like we talked about, she'd come through with after all the injuries and stuff, and now she's playing well. And U.S. Open doubles semis and third round singles, I believe, really awesome. So like, how was just your experience overall, like at the Open and watching her and supporting and assisting and stuff like that?
Yeah, I had an amazing Open. Like, it's kind of taken me a while to reflect on it. It was also my first time ever at a US Open.
Oh, wow.
Being a tennis player and a tennis fan, like, yeah, my whole life. So it's funny, like the first day I got there, she practiced on Ash with Coco. And so my first experience in Ash Stadium was walking court level onto the court during fan week. And it was like, I kind of had to like play it cool. Like it wasn't like that cool for me, but at the same time I'm looking up, and it was pretty surreal to like just be there. So like that, to kick off the couple of weeks I was there, like that was a pretty neat experience. And then I think for me, just like, Jenny and I have been kind of grinding it out since March with, her rehab. She's been out for so long, to kind of have like a firsthand experience to kind of see like what she's been through and what she's overcome. Like with her winning that first round singles match and the way she like threw her arms up in the air and just how happy she looked, I think was probably the most gratifying experience for me. Like so much work went into that. A lot of people were involved, and pro players, they play tennis to be able to play slams. Like, she had won some matches at tournaments before that in DC and Montreal, but to win at the slam level and just to see her excitement, I think that was probably like the most gratifying and most exciting part of the whole trip for me. So pretty surreal experience. It was great that they made semis and doubles, and to just be on the grounds like a couple of days when we had off days, like I would make myself into like a quote unquote tennis fan and just like be on the grounds, like go watch, some of the outer courts. And so that was pretty cool, especially my first time ever being there.
Yeah, definitely. I'm so happy that you had that experience, and definitely we'll link your IG so people can check out some of your posts on that. Had some fun ones. You mentioned, the most satisfying match, for Jennifer, the first match that she won there, but on singles, I think. But how about like the most thrilling? Because I'm looking at these scores here and I see three setters in a row. That's pretty fun. So I was curious, like which one was maybe like the most either like thrilling or like nerve wracking. I mean, yeah, a lot of fun matches.
Yeah. No, that second round match against Lynette, she got moved to play on Louis on a night match that round. So
cool.
that was, it was cool. And it, went 3 sets. It was a tight match, but she was able to pull it out. And I think the atmosphere, the fans around there playing an evening match there, I think that environment was probably maybe the most thrilling one of them all. And a lot of people watched it on TV too, just because it was prime time. And so it was cool to just get a lot of texts and things from friends and family that were watching that one and cheering her on. And there's kind of a whole family of people since I had moved down to Florida to work with Jenny that they've all converted to tennis fans now because I've been there and have been working with her, and they've all seen kind of all the work that we've been doing. And so we've converted a lot of tennis fans, and to see them having watch parties and like getting really into it was really cool for that match.
That's fantastic. Yeah. Good job converting them. Yeah. And 13 seeds that Jen and her partner beat there. So good stuff. And yeah, then to be unseeded and make the semis again, it's really amazing. In terms of Jen, what do you admire the most about her?
She's an amazing tennis player. Like she's really good at tennis. And I think just her competitive spirit, like she's very stubborn and hard-headed when it comes to some things. And that can be really challenging to work with. But I think it's what also makes her a really great competitor because she'll stop at nothing and she's determined to do whatever's possible to be the best and to make this comeback and reach all of her potential. And so that's something that I really admire. I mean, for her to go 2 years out of the sport, literally like could not play tennis with what she was going through. Like, a lot of people are still hitting here and there, when they have injuries, but literally could not train. I think the most admirable thing is despite how uncertain her comeback was going to be, like she still showed up every day. And we had some really hard days. I'm not going to lie. Like we're showing up and, putting in a session was tough, but to see her come through it and to stay determined, and I think that's probably the most admirable thing, and people won't really see that side of it watching her come back now, kind of those behind the scenes moments where she could have easily chosen to kind of give up or be really discouraged to not want to like put in the work. So
what do you think kept her going? Like, cause that's like really vital, like for the consistency aspect. Cause a lot of people like for one, whether it's like laziness or I don't know, pain, like they're like, all right, I'm taking a break. But
yeah,
what do you think kept her going?
Honestly, that's a really good question. That's probably one I should ask her myself. But I think what's clear to me, and if I had to guess, is just her love for the game and competing at a high level. I think that's probably a big piece of it for her.
Yeah, I definitely think you're right there. And then in terms of, you mentioned that obviously she's awesome, but like hard to work with, like in the terms of she's like, I guess stubborn and hard-headed, was it you said? But how do you this is important for coaches and maybe probably parents too, but like what's your strategy for those types of folks? Like what do you do to be able to convince them to do what you suggest? Because I know that like I forgot who mentioned it, but I guess like with Agassi, Gil Reyes, he said that Agassi would always like ask him like, why is he having him do something? So I was wondering like, what's your strategies there?
Yeah, no, I love Jenny. Like she's great to work with. We get along really well. But I think this goes like with any coaching relationship, right? Like we're humans first. And there is there are some qualities like of adapting to someone's humanness, or like what are their habits or behaviors, how are they going to respond, what motivates them, and that's kind of how you have to tailor your interactions with them. And so this is true with Jenny, but also true of all the athletes that I've worked with in the past, is creating buy-in. Like you said, it's making it important to them, like, why am I doing this? And when you can translate that in a simple way of why it's important or why you're making that decision that day, and you can show them like that there is a plan in place or a progression or reasoning behind why you're doing what you're doing. It builds trust with that person, and then also like makes them confident in, your role in helping them, or, that they're on track. And so I don't think it's one specific thing. I think if anything, it's recognizing and adjusting to whatever person you're working with and how they'll best respond or take feedback or what motivates them. And that's how you can kind of work together the best way and build trust in that relationship and move forward together. So we definitely had a lot of times where like we had to have hard conversations of like, I need this from you, or like, you need this from me. And where can we adjust to make our relationship stronger, make our communication better? And so just like any relationship that works out, like communication is really key.
Yeah, definitely love that. So kind of switching gears a little bit, I'm wondering, I don't know, like if you read a lot or not, but sometimes I ask guests for like their three favorite books that they would like gift to a friend to help them improve their game. So I was wondering if you have any books in mind, and if not, we can pivot to something else.
Yeah, improve your tennis game. I don't know. I have a lot. I've read more like recently, like things for professional development, like Atomic Habits.
Oh, that's good.
I think is a good one. I don't really have any that come to mind that are sports specific,
It could
or
be anything like mentality or physical stuff like therapy, anything.
Yeah, so Atomic Habits I think was a really good one, just simplifying routines and habits, becoming a more effective person in whatever you're doing. And then The Go Giver I think was also a good one I read recently, and just being open to giving freely, and then receiving can come from that on the back end. But yeah, I think those ones have been pretty impactful, especially like now transitioning into working in the professional side of the sport. Like, there's a lot of people that go into it for the attention maybe you'll get or the people that you'll meet. But in my role, it's always going to be about the person and me helping them as best I can. And, it's not about me at that point, like, at the end of the day.
Yeah, true. Most definitely. Good stuff. Yeah, I'll link these books here that you mentioned. And I've read Atomic Habits, super good. And then you've been the owner of the Athlete Connection for a few years now. So I just wonder if you want to shout that out, or like explain like, maybe how did you come up with the company and things like that.
Yeah, of course. So when I graduated from PT school, I started working just at a general outpatient orthopedic clinic. I got a lot of really good experience there, but was still unsettled at the end of the day. 12-year-old me always wanted to be a sports physical therapist. And where I was working with a lot of general population, which I loved. I got a ton of good experience, but I wasn't seeing as many athletes as I maybe would have liked. And just at that point, I was able to kind of pivot and open up my own practice. And so the Athlete Connection was born, and kind of the mentality behind it was just that from all of my own personal trials through sports injuries, rehab, coming back, I think I bring kind of a unique perspective to then working with people that are maybe going through similar situations as me, and being able to bring that perspective to the rehab process and kind of a mutual understanding, I think was unique to what I could provide for those athletes I worked with. And so I had my sports practice for like almost 3 years at that point, and worked with a lot of high school athletes, a lot of baseball, tennis, youth athlete. And then I got the itch. I wanted to see more tennis. So it's like I was seeing a lot of sports, but not as much tennis. And that's when I started looking at tour opportunities. And so been fortunate enough to be able to switch gears into that and still work under my umbrella of the Athlete Connection, and now offering services just in the tennis industry. And I'm really enjoying it so far.
Love it. That's amazing. And so I know you mentioned you're full-time with Jen, but I was wondering like how can people like still work with you? And if so, like how, would they get in touch?
Yeah, good question. So right now I'm not really set up to be able to work with like a lot of people. I think in the future, that's something I would like to do, but I was very full-time with her that I just didn't really have the time and space. But I do see myself in the future, opening up opportunities for virtual like consulting or, tennis specific resources. And so I see myself working on that kind of stuff in the near future.
Cool. Awesome. Awesome. And so one interesting question I ask my guests sometime, at least I think it's interesting, maybe it's not at all, but is like if you could put up a billboard in like a heavily trafficked street near you, what would you say on it?
One thing that I've kind of caught myself saying a lot in the last year, it's kind of helped me through things, is be grateful through it all. Like in moments of trials or like challenges, you don't really see that things are working in your favor, but then months later, you can kind of look back and see how going through that or facing that challenge or maybe suffering a little bit was all part of your personal growth and helped you get through. And so the last year or so, deciding to pivot away from my in-person practice, talking to different tennis players and not really finding a good fit that I really was excited about. And then Mark calling me about Jenny and, just kind of all worked out from there. But all the stuff Jenny and I went through and challenges there, and, there's going to be more challenges in the future. But I think that's something I've always come back to, is be grateful through it all.
Definitely. I really love that one. And yeah, when I'm on court and I'm struggling, like a lot of times I'll remember to be grateful and then like I instantly like play better. Just, just like the positive vibes.
Let it go.
Yeah, definitely. So that's really good. Any particular like, I don't know, socials or websites or anything you want to shout out for people to like check out for you? I mean, mainly.
Yeah, I think. Oh, it's for my personal stuff, or
well, it could be both. I mean, definitely like your stuff, like maybe give us your socials and then any websites, and then also if you had others, obviously you could feel free.
Yeah. So my Instagram is at the Athlete Connection. If you want to see all the good food places I go to and my dogs, that's probably where you'll get most of the content. I'm hoping to share more of the tennis travels, but I try to keep, Jenny's life private on there and not share too much. But if you are a tennis coach, I would recommend looking into the Society for Tennis Medicine and Science. I'm on the board for that organization, and we're revamping it. And so hoping to provide more resources for healthcare professionals that work with tennis players, but then also kind of bringing some of the research and science to the coach level, because that's where a lot of people can make a big impact with their players, like we talked about early on with injury prevention, managing training and workload. And so I think that would be cool if more coaches can get involved with our society. We actually have a conference coming up in a couple of weeks with free virtual registration for coaches. And so that's something I would recommend checking out.
That's super cool. I'm just making a note here. Cool. And then, so this question I asked all my guests at the end, and you've given us a lot of really great tips and advice today, obviously, but what is one key tip that you can give us to help us improve our tennis games?
Yeah. So key tip would be, doing some things to supplement your tennis for injury prevention. So I think, for your audience and adults, like, or a recreational player, like implementing a proper warm up and cool down routine and see how that starts to impact your performance. And then if you want to take it further, get in the weight room. I learned that as a college player, and I learn it again and again as a rehab professional. It can really help you out with your performance, but also preventing some of the common injuries that we see in our tennis players.
Got it. Love it. Thanks, Kayla. And then just to let you have the floor for a bit, like if there's anything else that, maybe we missed that you want to talk about or anything like that. Any last words, I guess?
I don't think I have anything. Like if anything was unclear, like maybe let me know and I can help out with it. But I'm here as a resource and happy to help out. The tennis world is very small. A lot of people know everyone. So even though I'm not directly working with other players right now, I'm still happy to be a resource, and I'm open if anyone wants to reach out.
Awesome, Kayla. Well, I really appreciate you coming on. It was a lot of fun to speak with you, and I really learned a lot today, as I'm sure the audience will too when they listen. So thanks again for coming on, and hope to see you soon.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks. All right. I really hope that you enjoyed my interview with Kayla. If you did, I would really appreciate it if you would leave a review for the podcast at tennisfiles.com/Apple Podcasts with an S at the end. I just find that Apple Podcasts seems to be the best place to leave reviews because it propels a show to be more visible over the other platforms. But leaving a review on any platform works for me. So appreciate your feedback there. Also want to leave you with a quote as I do at the end of every show. And this one is by, by Ralph Waldo Emerson. And Ralph said, "With the past, I have nothing to do, nor with the future. I live now." This is a really good quote in particular for tennis because we really do want to try our best to live in the present when we're playing matches. We don't want to think about past mistakes. We don't want to think about future results. We just want to be there in the present, and that's how we'll be playing our best. So I really like this one. All right, with that, really appreciate you listening. Hope that you're able to practice what you've been learning on the podcast and other platforms, and just stay diligent and consistent with it, and you will progress. So thanks for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode of the Tennis Files podcast. This is your host, Mirabana Ranshad, signing out.